Remember when Ubisoft used to be unique and different? Remember when they made games that were actually cool, experimental, and shaped Ubisoft in what it is today? Well, the Ubisoft of today is Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and insert third-person action adventure game that has an open-world RPG system with plenty of stuff to do. And that's kind of what Ubisoft is. But do you remember the Ubi Art engine? If you don't, it was actually a pretty cool engine that brought back a very beloved franchise, and it was actually really good. And today we're going to be talking about a game that used that very engine, an underrated and probably forgotten game. Today we're going to be talking about a childlike story, a watercolored painting brought to life, a young girl woken up in a strange land having to save a dying kingdom. But before I go any further, welcome to Stay Tuned on Gaming. I'm your host Damon, where we get to talk about video games for as long as I want. And today I'm going to be talking about the unique and the forgotten RPG, Ubisoft's Child of Light. Oh, and if you liked the video, subscribe down below. And of course, if you want to talk Child of Light, please comment down below and tell me what you liked or disliked about the game. Let's get into the video. Ubisoft. Today, they're mostly known for Assassin's Creed, turning any game they can into some live service nonsense, Far Cry, and the weird Ubisoft model. But back in the day, Ubisoft were actually a really good company. They would make some amazing titles and experiment a lot more. And in 2011, they probably did their biggest experiment. They made a brand new engine called the Ubi Art engine. It allowed developers to make 2D games without the need of extensive coding. They would even run these games at 60 frames per second, 1080p. Developers really liked the engine. It was easy to use, it had a lot of developmental tools, and you could make some really good games. The first game to come out of this engine was 2011's mega hit, Rayman Origins, and that game is fantastic. They would follow up with its sequel, Rayman Legends. And today we're looking at a game that uses that very engine, Child of Light. It was a much smaller game, a much smaller project, but it is still a game I think a lot of people should check out. So, what is Child of Light? Well, Child of Light's a 2014 RPG, kind of a platformer as well. It was developed by Ubisoft Montreal and published by Ubisoft. The game was released everywhere and it used that very same engine, Ubi Art. But I'm going to go further into the graphics much later. Let's first talk about the story. The story of Child of Light centers around Aurora, a young princess who finds herself in the mystical land of Lemuria after she falls into a deep slumber. Once awoken, scared and alone, she quickly runs into a young firefly named Ignulius, which I'm gonna name Igni or Firefly for short because I hate saying that name. It's just very difficult. He believes she's the one that can save Lemuria and bring light back to the land. She's quickly tasked to return the stars, the sun, and the moon back into the sky. Along the way of her journey, she will come across all different kinds of characters, explore Lemuria, and of course face challenging monsters and puzzles, and even her own family, all in the effort to return home and save her dying kingdom. The narrative of Child of Light is actually pretty good. I really did enjoy myself and was surprised by a lot of the heartfelt and sad moments in this game. Some of them were really well done. But on the other hand, I can also see a lot of people not really caring for it, and I think that's mostly due to the game's pacing. The first half of this game, or most of this game, is world building, character building, and you mostly just fighting enemies. Nothing much happens throughout most of this game until the late second half of it when the other people happen and there's a big betrayal. Only then does the game really pick up, and only then I was like, ooh, now I'm starting to really get into the story and I'm starting to really get into those moments. It's very much a children's fairy tale book, you know, those old fairy tales that you would read. It's very much that, and I kind of love all of that about the story. But pacing to me was just a little bit off when most of it in the beginning is just building up to that, and then we get to the end, which I feel is just completely rushed. You beat like the second last boss and then you immediately rushed into the last boss. And I was just like, whoa, that came out of nowhere. But what is here, again, is good. It's nothing super groundbreaking. You might forget it, some points here and there. I know I did. But I was surprised exactly how they handled the story and did it really well. I was really great by that. When it comes to characters, you have a wide variety cast and I think that's really good. But they're not really super memorable. The biggest thing I can say is that they're there. Really, I only remember like one or two characters like Rubelia, the circus gesture or clown. and it's because she can't rhyme. And I'll get to what I mean by that a little bit later. And that's really it. The rest, they're okay. They all have different stories. They're all introduced pretty well. You get some characters like pretty late on, and I was like, wow, I didn't expect to get even more characters. But again, this plays into the gameplay as they're all different and unique in some aspects. But you're gonna either be hit or miss with them. I found them pretty okay. I didn't find any of them to be boring. I think the best part is that at certain points, especially when you get new characters, there would be like short conversation stuff that would happen after battles, like randomly. And I thought those were some of the best parts of the character building, because they are hardly ever talk or show up mostly during this game. Most of them are like pretty silent. Now, the narrative to me is fine, but what really brings this game home is its music and its presentation. I spoke about the Ubi Art Engine in the beginning of the video, and they make every use of it. This game is beautiful. It still holds up after all this time, even giving a lot of 2D games of today a run for its money. This beautiful aesthetic that brings this fairy tale story to life with this 2D watercolor style that just is so beautiful. And the thing I love the most about this game is the use of its color. It's something you don't really see anymore that much from RPGs, most of it being very dark and drab. This one just springs to life with color, and I love a lot of the character designs, all of them unique and different. The backgrounds are super awesome. I love Aurora herself. She's 3D when you play with her, and her movements that she does, especially in battle when she gets hit or things. There's so many small and intricate details that just makes it so much fun to explore the world. And you just kind of want to take a picture of everything that Child of Light has to offer, because everything it has is really, really beautiful. The music as well is fantastic. It has a mixture of being beautiful but haunting at the same time. Its main theme is fantastic, and you better get used to it because you're going to be hearing it a lot. But it really just keeps you into this world. It never takes you out. The boss battles and the music for battling is also really, really good. Brings this high energy to a fight as you are thinking in your turn-based and real-time elements of what you need to do next. So it never ever gets super boring. Never once was I like, oh my gosh, I am tired of this track. I was just like, this is just nice and calming with some beautiful into it, you know? And I think you're probably going to remember the most of Child of Light is how they do their dialogue. And in this game's dialogue, they do a very poetic dialogue. Everything is like rhyming, you know, they rhyme every second word or things like that. And I was like, oh, that's very cute. And then also I was like, it's starting to get very annoying. And that's how you're going to feel about it. You're either going to find it cute and endearing, or you're going to find it very annoying very later on. Especially in certain moments where I felt that sometimes the rhyming really took me out of the story and took me out of the characters. But in other points, I thought it really did hit home how good the writing was, you know. Like I said, this book, if you were reading it to children, if it was reading a book to this children, and you would be like, oh my gosh, this actually kind of gets into it. Kind of like a Dr. Seuss book, you know, but with way more poignant moments into it. And yeah, overall, this was actually a surprisingly deep story in certain places, but I can also see people not giving a damn for it whatsoever until really later on in the game when it finally picks up. There is no voice acting at all. There is a little bit of voice acting in the beginning and then somewhere else to set up things here and there. It's very small, and the rest is all just normal, no voice acting and you reading it. So do get used to that when I do it. But overall, this was surprisingly good. I did enjoy it, and I gotta give it a good effort for this game. I didn't expect there to actually be some really good stories, considering I know Ubisoft, they always drop the ball somewhere, and in this one, it was a pretty good experience overall. So, let's talk about Child of Light's gameplay. Child of Light gameplay is an RPG with turn-based and real-time elements mixed together. It's separated into exploration and combat. Let's first talk about exploration, because I actually had a lot of fun with this game's exploration. At first, I thought it was actually going to be pretty boring and substandard with some platforming here and there. But you gain the ability to fly very, very quickly and early on in the game, and that immediately opened up exploration. From then on, you're zooming and zipping away in the air and hardly ever coming down. It was so much fun going through this world. Again, the music is great and it just helps you fall into this world, and you can't get enough of it. And because of the speed that you're going at, you're just able to zoom past and go through a lot of stuff. Most of the time, you can miss enemies completely. Like, the only reason you get into a fight is either you ran into the enemy because you didn't see him, or you want to fight him. And I kind of really like that. It allowed you to play at your own pace and move at your own pace as well. But what surprised me about exploration was how much stuff you can find, and that was cool. You can find a lot of chests that include the oculi. I'll get to that a little bit later. You can find hidden areas that act as platforming sections to get more rewards. You can even find secret bosses and secret areas to fight bigger enemies. All of that is fantastic. It just surprised me how much there was. You can even find permanent upgrades for your characters and sometimes secret side missions. There was more in this exploration than I thought there would be, and I really loved it. Now, it's not all perfect. For one reason, you can miss the complete area whatsoever. You'll hardly ever be on the ground, and some of the puzzlings are very easy, and some of the platforming is super easy. It can get a bit finicky because Aurora's not the best to control in the air. What is here is great. What I also want to talk about is Igni, the little firefly that follows you around. Now, he's actually able to be used in combat and in exploration. So let's first talk about combat. In combat, he can unlock doors for you, light up dark areas, and even get chests out of reach. If there's certain things you cannot get, he can get for you, even like the permanent upgrade stuff, which I think is pretty cool. The one thing he does is he can heal you outside of combat, which makes the game way more fun. And 2, he can actually activate these flowers. Now, when you hit these flowers, orbs jump out of them. And if you collect these orbs in like order from the gold one to the end, it actually gives you extra health and magic. And you can use him to collect them as well. He even has a light meter that can be used to distract enemies. This is the thing you'll probably use the most of is it can distract enemies, which allows you to get behind the enemy and then get them for a surprise attack, which is fantastic. You control Igni with your right stick, and you can even have him zooming around to help you out. And all of that's really good. I really found the exploration of Child of Light to be something kind of good. I didn't expect to like it as much. Most of the time in RPGs, I kind of hate a lot of the exploration, especially ones that had random battle encounters. I like to see my enemies on the screen. And in this one, I just had so much fun flying. I couldn't get enough of it. I couldn't get enough of just exploring and just taking the world in. I had a real good time with it. Now, let's talk about combat, because this is probably the most interesting part of Child of Light. Child of Light, like I said, is turn-based with real-time elements. You stand on two sides, with the first side being you and your teammate, and then you face a maximum of 3 enemies. Now, where the turn-based comes in and the real-time elements comes in is how combat is handled. It all works with a timeline. Now, RPG timeline mechanics isn't something new. I've seen it in a lot of other games, but the way that Child of Light does its timeline is a lot different. There are 2 sections of the timeline. There's the wait section, where you can't really do anything, and then there's the cast section. Once you get to the start of the cast section, you're allowed to do a certain action, whether it's doing an attack, casting magic, using a potion, or even defending. Each of these will take various times, which will be short, long, medium, very long, and then it'll be placed through the cast system. Once you reach the end of the cast, you finally do your action. Now, where this comes in is how you can manipulate the timeline. Every single one of these games always talks about how you can manipulate it. And I found that the combat and the strategy of the combat was much deeper than I thought it was. And this is where you'll probably have the most fun with this game. Now, while you're casting, you're completely vulnerable. And unlike the wait time, you actually can get penalized if you get hit while you're casting. If you're hit or your enemy is hit, you get pushed back onto the timeline, meaning you go from cast to wait, going back to being defenseless. This can cause like a knock-on effect. Let's say your first teammate gets there. You then have Aurora attack, and the enemy comes into the cast section. You then attack the enemy, which sends him back in the timeline. The second character, which you will have, will be coming up to its cast section. Let's say it's Rubalia, for example. Now you use her cast mechanic, and just as she's coming to the end, the enemy comes back into its cast to do his magic attack. And then Rubalia hits him, knocking him back again. This causes a great knock-on effect, and it's really fun. You can do it really well, you can make it to the enemy hardly ever attacks you. It becomes a bit more complicated when there are other enemies involved. And what's great is that you can manipulate it even further. You can slow down enemies, you can speed up enemies, you can speed yourself up, you can even create a stuff like unstoppable, you can even ensure that you can defend yourself, which then blocks you from being knocked back. You all are trying to make sure you can get to your attack much faster. Enemies themselves also have a variety of speeds. Some go super fast in the weight, but only cast really slow. Some are super fast in weight and fast in casting, and you'll be able to figure out and try to match their speeds. At first I was kind of annoyed about Child of Light because you only had 2 teammates. I was like, why there's only 2? At most you get 3 or 4 when it comes to RPGs. But the game quickly understands that you are not going to be using these characters every time. You'll be switching out characters with no penalty whatsoever to the situation required. For example, when I have a character finally coming up to cast like Aurora, most of her attacks are medium range. But the person that's casting, the enemy, is nearly at the end of his cast system. I know that the character Rubelia has a much short attack, and I know that she can get there before him. And so I switch to Rubelia and use her attack and knock him back on the timeline. That is the way it plays. Now the enemies themselves can also interrupt you, slow you down, they can buff you as well, they can even paralyze you. All of this plays into it. And you'll have certain characters that can attack multiple enemies. You can have allies be using other status effects as well. And this is all great. The gameplay goes much deeper than I thought it did. But then comes Igni. Now, like I said before, the Firefly helps you in exploration, but in combat, he does the same thing. When exploration, he blinds enemies that allows you to go from behind and attack them. He kind of does the same thing here. He has the ability to blind the enemies, slowing the enemies down. This is great if you need to separate enemies from each other, such as, let's say there are 2 enemies really close to one another, and when they get in the timeline, they're just messing you up, or you want to bundle them all together so that when they finally get to the same cast time, you can knock them all back. You'll be using this ability the most, switching out and trying to see who is the one you need to slow down. And it's not permanent. He has a light bar that fills very quickly in exploration, but when you're in combat, it fills really slow. In order for that to help, you need to make sure you gain all the flowers around the battlefield. There's usually 2, and in boss fights there are 3, and they take a while to come back, but you'll be using that ability a lot. It just allows you to keep thinking. You're always thinking of what to do next. If I cast here, what happens in the wait? I'm always looking not at what my enemies are going to do, but where they are on the timeline. I'm slowing down with Igni, I'm making sure I'm casting right, and I want to maximize it so that they never have a chance to attack. And if they do, then I have the chance to block. Now, the big issue I have with this game is its difficulty. There are 2 modes, casual and expert. In casual, there are certain fights that can be kind of challenging, but they're nothing too difficult. You will probably get through the game at a decent pace if you play this game on casual. But on expert, sometimes the game is quite difficult, meaning you'll have to maybe grind to get to certain areas, or sometimes you just have to get lucky, as the enemy can be a lot more cheap in expert. Maybe I'm not that good at this game, which I will admit, but expert felt really tough to me, and at certain points I did switch it to casual because I was getting quite annoyed at this game, because sometimes the enemies, like I said, were really cheap. Let's talk about the skill tree, and this is the problem I have with Child of Light. I don't like this skill tree. You have 4 quadrants that you can go down, each having small buffs to your character and then eventually having a move unlocked, be it a new move that's either active or passive, and then you can get upgrades through those moves. Like, you can make it more powerful, or you can attack multiple enemies. At first I thought this was a really cool ability and a really cool skill tree, but I started to really hate it as on, because it locks you into these different trees and you can't really go anywhere else. The trees don't connect to one another, so it's not like once you get to that ability you can go further into another section. You're kind of just locked in, and some of the better abilities and their better attacks are way down the line, which sucks. I wanted to get certain attacks that attack everybody, but that didn't happen, meaning I had to try to go down only one section, and then spreading out the points is not even a good idea, because the points, you don't get that much after you level up. You only usually get 1 or 2, meaning if you want to fully complete all of their trees, you'll have to do a lot of grinding, like a lot of grinding in various areas of the game. And then let's talk about the crafting system. Now, this game does have a crafting system with these things called oculi, and the crafting system isn't bad. You get the small gems called oculi, and they all have different colors: blue, red, teal, you name it, they have these various colors. If you bring 3 of the same colors together, you make a much bigger and more powerful gem. If you bring multiple colors together, you make a different color. You make all this stuff. Now, these can all be placed into 3 sections of the characters. One is attack, where let's say you use the red oculi, will add fire elements to your weapon. If you put it in armor, it will give you fire resistance. And then if you put it as a passive, it'll add a passive skill of maybe increasing your health or your magic. Playing with the crafting system was actually kind of fun. The game hardly tells you what combinations you can make, meaning you'll always be experimenting. And what's great is that it never allows you to make a mistake in experimenting. The only issue I had was that most of these oculi are either hidden in chests, and you get them sometimes after battle. So I never found myself having enough. But you are able to build literally anything with these characters. If you want this character to have water elements and water resistance, you can do that, which is really awesome. I did also find some weirdness with this game, was its weird weakness system. It has this light versus dark system, right? Where light attacks can almost kill dark enemies and dark enemies can kill you. But they also have the elemental weaknesses as well. But it's not like the standard elemental. Water doesn't get beat by fire. Instead, it gets beat by electricity. Fire gets beat by water, and then electricity gets beat by other elements as well. The game also doesn't have a bestiary, which I found pretty goddamn annoying, because many times I wanted to know what the weakness of this enemy was, and I had no idea. I had to remember, which also made me pretty annoyed, because I would love to have seen them. There's also no like health meter, so you have no idea how much damage you're doing. Boss fights are pretty cool and pretty interesting, but like I said, because of what difficulty you play on, they can either be really easy or really goddamn tough, which was pretty bad in my opinion, because there's no in between. You'll have to do some grinding if you do expert in this game. Overall, I didn't expect to enjoy the gameplay as much. Every fight became kind of a big strategy battle that you usually don't have in RPGs, especially much later down the road. Yeah, if you weren't careful, small enemies could stun lock you into every single time they attack you while you're trying to cast. It can get pretty crazy. And the depth I had in some of the gameplay was unbelievable, especially for such a small game. Now, is it the biggest depth ever? No, but this is a very 10 to 15 hour game, and the gameplay kept me engaged throughout. I never once got bored or hated the gameplay or hated even the combat system. I loved the exploration. I could spend hours just flying around in the world, looking at the background, looking at enemies, trying to find the secret areas, and I could spend almost just amount of time doing the gameplay. It's a pretty surprising what they were able to do with this game. Lastly, when it comes to the gameplay, let's talk about the 2-player mode, because this game can be played with 2 players. One player will take control of Aurora, and the other player will take control of Igni, the Firefly, and they will basically be able to do everything you can, but they have full control. And I actually found this pretty much shocking. I didn't expect a 2-player mode in this game, and it kind of really works, especially if you have a significant other or somebody who wants to play the game with you, but they suck at playing RPGs. They can help you just as much as you use Igni by yourself. And I found it to be pretty cool, you know. It's a cool feature to have. It's nothing groundbreaking, but most RPGs don't have 2-player things whatsoever, and just having the little interactivity that you can with 2-player is really cool. I really like the 2-player thing. I actually would use it if a friend of mine wanted to play the game, but they suck at RPGs. They can be Igni, I can play the game, and we can both have a great time experiencing Child of Light. Like I said, it's not that long. It's like 10-15 hours. So you get a good grip and you don't have to spend 50 hours playing this game. Overall, that was actually pretty cool. The gameplay is solid, and I really did enjoy it. Child of Light surprised me. It truly is a forgotten gem by Ubisoft, a title which they don't do anymore. They haven't created something really original in a long time. The narrative surprised me with how sad and heartfelt it can be, but it can be a hit or miss with some when it comes to the poetic dialogue. The gameplay was deeper than I thought it was, and exploration was really fun. I found the game's pacing to be pretty okay. It's about 10 to 15 hours, but I didn't like a lot of the skill tree. I just found it pretty boring. If you do want to complete this game, it's pretty easy to do, though I think 100% might be really tough to do all together. It's sad that Ubisoft will never probably make a sequel to this or anything close to this. The Ubisoft engine is dead in favor for their new engine, Snowdrop, which they make all of their Assassin's Creed use. And Ubisoft no longer even tries to make anything original or super unique, mostly banking on franchises of old or something new. Child of Light is a beautiful mixture of watercolored paintings, children's fairy tales, an RPG system that really works, and overall just a really good game. It has a couple of flaws, but what you have is something truly fun. Something that I can play again maybe down the line, and is quite a memorable title. Now all we have to do is wait for Ubisoft to finally release Beyond Good and Evil 2, in whatever future that will be. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, and of course, subscribe.